Our planet is a never-ending wonder. 1,000,000 years would barely suffice to see all the sights nature has curated, and it would take another billion to truly comprehend their machinations and ecosystems. So, in our human shackles, we can but watch and try to use our time to admire these gardens of life while we are able to. Today, we will look at one of the most active corners of our globe, the New World, the expanse only recently discovered through the efforts of the Hunters Guild. This massive continent and its surrounding islands have been the subject of much guild and research activity, and present a perfect place to experience the splendor of our world. This is in no small part due to the staggering diversity of the wildlife. From endemic unicates to familiar faces, the New World is home to over 70 large monsters, all with their own place in the ecosystem. In this documentary film, we will pay each of them a visit, discovering the miraculous and fascinating ways in which they live in this biological paradise. While every single one of them could and probably will fill their very own documentary episode, this film will serve as an extensive overview of all the wonders the New World has to offer. At the center of the New World lie the Coral Highlands, a wellspring of bountiful life. Even the most weary explorer will find their smile unfold as they gaze upon the colorful cascade of natural wonders. But nature is inherently about balance, prey and predation, cold and hot, life and death. The natural world equalizes itself continuously, and thus the life and splendor of the Coral Highlands, and of the entire continent, is quite literally built upon the death and decay of another area of the New World. Should an adventuring hunter decide to descend past the pomp and glamour of the corals, and seek their roots, they will inevitably find themselves in a valley of miasmic decay, the bedrock for all life and all death in the New World. The Rotten Vale. While the lofty heights of the Great Ravine seem to be filled by the Coral Highlands, the entire bottom of the chasm is what the Guild has dubbed the Rotten Vale. It could not be more dissimilar to its coral companion. Instead of a rainbow of life, the Rotten Vale is seeped in the green hues of a gaseous death. The rocky walls are adorned with dead, decaying filament, and bones and corpses litter the entire floor. It cannot be described as anything but a gigantic graveyard. But even a grave has a function in nature. As it comprises the bottom of the ravine, anything that dies above will inevitably fall into the vale and decay back into the earth. Due to the presence of a special bacterium known as effluvium, the decomposition happens much faster and much more efficiently than normal. Because effluvium travels as a gas, the nutrients from the decomposition are swept up as aerosol particles, which get caught in the numerous upward drafts of the ravine and swept upwards, where they sustain and nurture the corals and their adjacent co-inhabitants. Thus, the Coral Highlands could not exist without the Rotten Vale. And as the Coral Highlands also function as a major ley line for bioenergy and nutrients to travel through on their journey to cover the entire continent, it is no exaggeration to say that the Rotten Vale is instrumental to the continued existence of life on the New World, the ending and yet new beginning of the circle of life. Effluvium, which is deadly to humans and vivarians, thus plays the role of an envoy of new life, tearing it from the flesh of those that came before. And the fauna of the continent understands that. Whether instinctually or otherwise, all mobile life on the continent seems compelled to die either in or near the Rotten Vale, a final pilgrimage undertaken when the grasp of death feels particularly near. Of course, few actually make it. Hunters have to eat, after all. But enough death concentrates around the Vale nonetheless keeping its life-giving function up perpetually. The biggest event for the valley is, however, the death of an elder dragon. As the unassailable kings of the food chain, they contain the most bioenergy out of all living beings, and their death sets off a veritable explosion of new life. It has even been observed that elder dragons from the old continent may be attracted to the rotten Vale when their time comes. In fact, the main explored areas of the Vale are mostly comprised of the skeletons of two gargantuan elder dragons, thought to be prehistoric ancestors of the great Dalamadur, a serpentine elder dragon thus unseen in the New World. In the lowest depths, pools of blue acid illuminate the caverns, thought to have leaked out from the stomach of one such beast. And it is likely that much of the rotten Vale was shaped like this, its landscape of death molded by the remains of the dead, now home for those who thrive among the decay. The food chain of the rotten Vale is unique in that it has an unusual amount of scavengers. When your habitat regularly experiences rains of corpses, it doesn't make sense to actively hunt for living prey. This factor shifts the ecological dynamic of the inhabitants away from active predation and much heavier towards territorial defense. The winner isn't the one who can hunt, it's the one who can find a source of food and defend it. To that end, many different strategies develop, including that of the Girros, the lowest monster on the food chain. These serpentine-fanged wyverns don't pack much of a punch by themselves, as they are fairly small and frail, so they mitigate that in the classic way, teamwork. The Girros form lifelong packs, inseparable communities that protect and nurture each other continuously. It's in these packs where the Girros become properly dangerous. They each carry a fairly strong paralytic venom in their fangs, and while one bite from a small Girros won't immediately be cause for concern, 10 bites certainly will. This threat makes the pack strategy fairly effective, which allows the Girros to defend any found corpses successfully. They can even opt for battles of attrition. As the lower depths of the Rotten Vale are filled with effluvium, most inhabitants have to tread very carefully and swiftly, as the bacteria is deadly after prolonged exposure. The Girros, however, need not fear it. Their bodies are covered in smooth, overlapping scales which minimize the surface area the bacteria can attach to. And on their necks, they have specialized gills, lined with membranes which can filter out the effluvium from their breath and expel it back out, making these wyverns very resistant to the bacteria. It is also for this reason that the Girros prefer to nest in the remote lower areas of the Vale, where unprotected adversaries will not venture. Every pack needs a leader, and the Girros are no exception. The strongest and oldest male will, under the right conditions, grow into a great Girros, which exhibits numerous differences to its regular brethren. Both its general physique and especially its fangs are enlarged, which comes with increased offensive abilities. The enlarged fangs are also more sophisticated in their usage. The small Girros can only administer the venom through direct bites, while the great Girros can additionally coat the fangs entirely in its venom, causing even just a scratch to be contagious. And if that fails, the great Girros can mix the venom into its saliva and spit it out for ranged paralytic attacks. The most noteworthy difference comes at the neck. Its gills are modified to resemble a massive hood, which can be expanded at will. This hood serves many purposes, most obviously intimidation. The additional muscles around the hood enable another ability altogether though. By expanding and contracting its gills, the great Girros can produce a humming noise, which all smaller Girros immediately understand to be an order for backup. This means that even a seemingly lone great Girros can summon all of its posse at a moment's notice. Said posse is fiercely loyal to their great leader, as they understand the crucial role he plays in their daily survival. While Girros are fiercely aggressive towards other species as a result of the territorial competition of the Vale, they display surprising care and affection for each other and their leader, defending him even while he sleeps. While the Girros are capable of living among the fumes of effluvium, not all inhabitants of the Rotten Vale have such a luxurious adaptation. Some are completely helpless in the face of the bacteria. This separates the rotten vale into two distinct strata. The lower levels are where the effluvium accumulates, forming thick clouds of deadly mist. The Girros and likewise adapted species dwell within these sickly torrents. The upper levels, meanwhile, are well lit and mostly free of effluvium. This forms the habitat of all species which are not resistant to the bacteria, forcing them to scavenge among the corpses in the higher plateaus. One such species is the Radobaan. While its imposing mass and grimly appearance make it seem fearsome, this brute wyvern is incapable of dominating the Vale due to its inability to descend into the effluvium. Thus, it exclusively patrols the upper levels for food. The Radobaan is not just a brute wyvern, but also part of the infraorder of the hammer wyverns. Hammer wyverns are heavy-set and long, with massive, chunky tails. They are often distinguished by their ability to curl up into a ball or wheel and roll around their surroundings, both for offense and defense. They are also generally capable of harnessing their digestive gases for various effects, be it burn or sleep. All of these also apply to the Radobaan. However, there is one trait of this infraorder that this rolling brute did not inherit. Hammer wyverns are generally covered in thick body armor, as is well seen in the Radobaan's cousin, the Odogaron. This armor generally makes them slow at turning though, which would be a massive weakness in the winding and twisting environment of the Vale. Thus, Radobaan are born with no armor, making them much more agile than other hammer wyverns. This comes at an obvious price: no armor, no protection. But this is where the Radobaan adapted in a truly unique way. Radobaan primarily eat bones, sucking the marrow out of them and crunching the calcium. They scavenge by collecting bones and gathering them in massive piles, where both juicy fresh bones and exhausted old bones lie together. When a Radobaan is about to lay eggs, it will dig underneath its bone piles and into the muddy tar of the Vale. When the younglings then hatch, they will have to burrow through the tar, which is a sticky black substance. This tar will stick to the soft, specialized skin of the younglings, which will be permanently coated in the black tar. Once they emerge from the ground, they find themselves under the bone piles, where they learn the Radobaan's secret. If you don't have natural armor, just stick it onto yourself. By digging through the bones while covered in sticky tar, the Radobaan covers itself in hard, overlapping bones which stick to the tar immediately. This armor is then optimized through careful grooming, where the Radobaan directs the bones and puts them in specific places for different purposes. Huge bones at the hip joints to allow for better maneuvering, and big bone cages around the chin to make sure that it's protected from attacks. Thanks to this trick, the Radobaan retains its maneuverability while boasting a replenishable, customizable suit of armor. Its only downside is that these bones can be broken or simply torn off, which can leave the Radobaan very vulnerable. If that happens, however, it can just find another pile of bones and reform its armor. While it is true that many of the Vale's inhabitants rely on scavenging for food, there are still some true predators in the valley. Such a predator is the Odogaron, a crimson-fanged wyvern who will settle for scraps and corpses if necessary, but is also not opposed to active hunting. To do that, it will patrol both the entire Rotten Vale and even the Coral Highlands, which it can reach thanks to its highly mobile physique. Being a predator in a giant heap of decay is quite unusual, and thus the Odogaron exhibits a few unusual adaptations. For one, while it has visible eyes, it is almost entirely blind, instead relying on its specialized nose to take in its surroundings. Its olfactory organ is modified to both filter out most of the aerosol effluvium on the lower levels and detect scents even at their most minute, allowing the Odogaron to track prey even among the thick fog of decompositional odors. But its most unique adaptation is found in its feet. Odogaron have 10 claws on each foot, 4 false claws and 6 true ones. The false claws are always extended and somewhat blunt, as their main function is to facilitate running and sneaking, similar to the static claws of dogs. The true claws, however, are more reminiscent of cats, as they are folded upwards most of the time and can be extended at will. These claws are razor sharp, specifically meant for slashing and cutting. They are also lined with jagged hooks, which will leave messy gashes in anything they slash. These gashes will cause massive bleeding, which serves three purposes. It obviously quickens the prey's death, it allows the Odogaron to track the scent of their blood even more efficiently should they get away, and, if it happens in the Vale, the open wound allows a fluvium to enter freely, killing the prey even faster. The Odogaron's adaptations don't end there, however. While it isn't the biggest or strongest monster in the Vale, it makes up for it by investing into speed completely. Its slender physique already allows for rapid movement, but it goes beyond that. The Odogaron's very neural network evolved to process information and issue muscular commands faster than most other organisms. This works through modified neurons that sport a massively reduced refractory period, the cooldown each nerve cell experiences between letting signals through. In addition to that, its synapses are much faster transferring chemical signals into the nerves, making its perception much faster as well. The Odogaron even evolved a trump card of sorts. A bizarre behavioral quirk of the species is that they separate the raw meat from their food and store it. While they will eat marrow, sinew, skin, and everything else on the spot, muscle tissue is reserved for special occasions. Those occasions are, specifically, mortal danger. Should an Odogaron deem a situation overly dangerous, it will rush back to its nest and eat some of its stored meat. Its body will then enter a unique state researchers have come to call proteinogenic overdrive, in which the meat it ingested kickstarts a metabolic explosion. In this state, all of Odogaron's physical abilities are enhanced, its body a steaming, glowing red furnace that leaps and slashes at ferocious speeds. Its true claws also become more dexterous and more dangerous. However, no animal is faultless, and the Odogaron is no exception. Proteinogenic overdrive is a last resort, a final gambit which cannot be upheld for long, as it relies on frenzied, perpetual movement like a desperate sprint. Halting the Odogaron's movement is all it takes for it to wear off, leaving the beast exhausted. And stopping an Odogaron's assault is perhaps easier than it should be for those in the know, as its unique neural network comes at a cost. When the synapses are that eager to absorb chemicals, it's not rare for them to absorb something they shouldn't. For example, the paralytic venom of the Girros, which is assumed to have evolved in direct response to the Odogaron's presence. Nevertheless, the Odogaron still manages to terrorize the Rotten Vale when it can. It is, however, not considered its apex species. Apex species are defined as monsters so fearsome that they are prey to nothing, at worst ending a fight in a draw and fearing nothing but elder dragons. These creatures are rare, with few ecosystems supporting more than one or two at most. One such species, however, is a little more infamous than others, as few monsters are as feared by the guild as the nigh-on legendary Tigrex. This nomadic flying wyvern is well known to travel all across the old world, but in the new world, it has predominantly settled in the Rotten Vale, instantly establishing itself as a top dog. While species like the Odogaron excel due to varied and unique adaptation, the Tigrex excels because of the exact opposite reason. It is by and large the oldest and truest representative of the feet wyvern suborder, having evolved very little from the group's oldest known ancestor, the wyvern rex. The feet wyverns are distinguished by their modified front legs, which have massively reduced wing membranes in favor of increased muscle mass and a more favorable angle to the ground. This adaptation makes the Tigrex rather unwilling to fly, but immensely effective on the ground, being able to run at speeds topping out at 50 km per hour. The Tigrex uses this speed to chase down any prey it finds, as it is a frenzied and aggressive hunter. In the Rotten Vale, it gets to freely choose whether it wants to bully the locals or eat the corpses. Should anyone be foolish enough to challenge it, the Tigrex will make short work of them. Its speed and muscle mass already fierce weapons, but they aren't the only ones. The Tigrex's tail is adorned with a multitude of spikes, turning the prehensile limb into a deadly flail. Through its many weapons, the Tigrex can cause tremendous damage, as it spins, charges, and leaps around and atop its target. Even its very voice can be weaponized. Attached to its lungs is an additional air sac, a pressurized organ which can force additional air into the lungs and release it explosively. When that released air is then shot through the Tigrex's voice box and out of its mouth, it results in destructive roars that can topple targets through sheer force of sound alone. Should all of that still not be enough to deter an attacker into submission, the Tigrex can pull one last trick. As it grows more agitated and frustrated with the length of a fight, the Tigrex will begin releasing enormous amounts of adrenaline, which will cause its muscles and blood vessels to balloon up well beyond their usual size. In this state, visible through the pulsing red veins all around the beast, its strength is increased many-fold, and while it cannot keep this up for long without risking heart failure, it is more than enough to handle almost any threat. The position of apex predator is rarely uncontested, however. The ancient ferocity of the Tigrex may seem insurmountable, but from the Rotten Vale emerged a natural counter, a completely new subspecies of an old world monster capable of challenging the Tigrex. That would be the acidic Glavenus, a Glavenus subspecies entirely endemic to the Rotten Vale. Like with all localized subspecies, its most apparent difference to its regular cousin is the different coloration, with a sickly green and grey coat of metallic scales which help it blend in with the fumes and decaying tissue of the Vale. In behavior, it doesn't stand much apart from the regular Glavenus, being a tad more aggressive and territorial due to the increased pressure of the Vale. No, the real difference is the tail. While the regular Glavenus boasts a thick and heavy tail that it swings with great effort and little glamour, the acidic Glavenus's tail is much thinner and lighter. This allows for faster, more elegant swordsmanship, with more sophisticated strikes, slashes, and even feints. But that is not where the differences end. While the regular Glavenus's tail is completely massive and solid, the acidic subspecies has its tail lined with multiple thin vessels that hold an acidic compound derived from the monster's nutrition. These vessels are dormant as long as the blade is sharp. But once it dulls, the vessels open up and begin secreting the compound, which hardens into green crystals once they make contact with air. Those crystals' bespoke purpose is to soften up the dull blade, preparing it to be easily sharpened by the acidic Glavenus's teeth. They do, perhaps accidentally, serve a second purpose though. Because the softening takes time on the immensely hard shell of the beast, the acidic Glavenus will not immediately sharpen, instead continuing its assault while the crystals do their work. This can result in the crystals breaking off and releasing their acid as a cloud of gas, which will corrode and destroy any hard shelling it comes into contact with, weakening the enemy. This ability makes the acidic Glavenus enormously successful in its predation, to the point that it is the only inhabitant of the Rotten Vale that has never been observed scavenging. But alas, even the most ingenious adaptations and surprising advantages cannot hold up to the true rulers of all ecosystems, the Elder Dragons. Creatures revered and feared for their mysterious and overwhelming powers, it is only natural that they reign supreme over their lands. The Rotten Vale is no exception, but it does boast perhaps the most uniquely fitting resident Elder Dragon. The decaying valley is shaped and defined by the effluvium, and thus the Rotten Vale's lord is also lord of the effluvium. The grotesque Vaal Hazak receives its name from the native words signifying corpse dragon, and a more fitting moniker it could not have. This gangly menace dwells in the deepest depths of the Vale, beyond the pits of acid dripping from the dead behemoth's stomach, upon a mountain of cadavers. Here, in its kingdom, it presented researchers with a truly extraordinary ability. Through what must have been eons of co-evolution, the Vaal Hazak entered a permanent symbiosis with the effluvium. The beast hunts and stores prey in its lair, where the effluvium can decompose it freely. In exchange, the effluvium flows freely through the Vaal Hazak's body and aids both in combat and digestion. This digestive help isn't exclusive to its stomach. The effluvium will begin digesting anything directly in contact with the Elder Dragon's body and funnel extracted nutrients into the Vaal Hazak. Thus, the Elder Dragon benefits from being covered in flesh and corpses, as its symbiosis turns it into a walking stomach. Should it need to feed the traditional way, it uses its two jaws for maximum efficiency. The outer jaw clamps down and holds the prey in place, while the inner, smaller jaw starts biting out chunks and forcing them into the monster's throat, where the effluvium can get to work. In combat, the Vaal Hazak can command the effluvium with frightening accuracy, spewing large quantities of it from its mouth as beams and bombs, or using its mere presence to augment all of its physical attacks. Even beyond the bacteria, the beast has razor-sharp claws, and the two aforementioned jaws which will open up nasty wounds, further facilitating an effluvial infection. In its most extreme move, the Vaal Hazak can command the effluvium inside other organisms to flock to it, taking any nutrients they extracted with them, instantly killing the infected organism and strengthening the Elder Dragon. Crucially, however, the Vaal Hazak cannot generate the effluvium. It is an autonomous bacteria and must reproduce the same way most bacteria do. This means that extended combat or feeding can cause the Vaal Hazak to exhaust its effluvium reserves and force it back into the depths to coat itself in a new colony. The rotten Vale stands as the starkest reminder that for all of the beauty inherent to life, death is no less a natural part of the world. In fact, most if not all life on the New World could only exist thanks to the cycle of life and death that converges at this decaying canyon. While it may look and smell putrid, the rotten Vale is the source of all life on the explored peninsula of the continent, and its ferocious tenacity and fierce inhabitants command respect for that alone. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I know I still have a couple of ride or die people for Monster Hunter on my channel, and this series is not ending anytime soon. I'm going to continue until I have all locations of Monster Hunter World done, so no worries, that is all planned. I hope this was interesting, and a special thank you to all my patrons, including Fictionape, Mr. Game, Cini, Courage, Alex, Iron Camel, Jameson Tate, Ludenther, Paracha, Peroscoco, Project Iceman, That's Just Ash, Mr. Meander, and Geo. Again, thank you so much, and remember, if you want your name here, and if you now, newly added, want early access to all videos, you can just join the Patreon in the link in the description. Even if you don't, I will still love you, and I hope to see you again next time. Bye bye!